Good morning and welcome to Will Work for Food, the New Possibilities Hour. Today is September 9th, 2021, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. People from around the world, it's such a fun Thursday morning to wake up to see everyone. Today we are honored and especially honored to welcome Bernie Heinze. He will be talking to us about doing the right thing, even though no one is looking, what it means to be ethical in today's world, which should be fascinating. As you know, there is no charge for these programs. Instead, we ask that if you like what you hear, that you contribute to either a local food bank of your own choice or to the food bank that the speaker has suggested. And if you are so inclined to let Natalie know how much it is you've donated so we can keep track of what we know anyway. It's just an amazing thing. So Jeff, do you have today's numbers on the donations and contributions that we know of so far?
Thank you, Jean. I'm very happy to announce that the ADR and legal communities continue to be so generous in contributing in honor of these great webinars. The running total as of this morning is $161,553. Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Well, that is fantastic. Natalie, you were just telling us about how many meals that might be. Let's hear that number.
So, Jean, depending on the buying power of the food bank that you donate to, every dollar that you donate can generate between 10 and 20 meals. So $161,000 plus in donations means that our industry, our lovely industry of resolutionists and litigators, has provided more than 2 million meals worldwide to our neighbors who have some food insecurity, which gets me all kind of verklempt.
Well, that's fantastic. That's just so thrilling. So thank you, everyone. Your generosity and the generosity of all those who've come now for over a year is truly amazing and appreciated. So today's speaker, his preferred food bank is, Natalie, you have that information? And you were putting it in the chat.
Yep. Mr. Heinze's preferred food bank today is Mana on Main Street in Lansdale, Pennsylvania. Their web address, if you'd like to make a donation, is Mana, MANAONMAIN.org, manaonmain.org.
Great, thank you. And that information will be in the chat as always. So thank you for any donation that you can make to any food bank wherever in the world you might choose. Then let me introduce Bernie Heinze. Bernie is, I should say Mr. Heinze, maybe for the first time out here, but I've known Bernie now for a while, and so is more personal. So I will go with that. Bernie is President and Chief Executive Officer of the Heinze Group in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, and also in London, England. The organization is comprised of an international and multidisciplinary group of defense and coverage attorneys and insurance professionals providing risk, litigation, claims administration, audit, and outcome management consultative services. Bernie's also called upon to serve as an expert witness and provides testimony in state and federal courts across the country, and has testified before Congress on several occasions on matters pertaining to insurance-related activities. He also serves as Executive Director of the Federation of Defense and Corporate Counsel and International Association of Premier and Peer-Reviewed Defense and Corporate Counsel and Insurance Industry Claims Professionals. He was also Vice President and Chief Legal Counsel of a domestic property and casualty insurance company, an equity partner on insurance defense and coverage matters with the Wilson Elzer law firm, and a litigation associate with the Marshall Dennehy law firm in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He has served in many capacities for both public good and private companies. He was a legislative assistant for Congressman Jack Kemp in Washington, D.C. And once he starts presenting, you will understand why they were more than happy to have him as a weekend anchor at WAVA News Radio in Washington, D.C. He received his law degree from Temple University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and is rated AV preeminent by Martindale-Hubbell. He was also named as one of the 100 most powerful people in the insurance profession in North America each year since 2001 by the Insurance Letter and Insurance Distribution magazine. He has many, many other credentials, but maybe a more interesting one here as well, in addition to the broadcasting, is that he is a founder, life member, and former president and active firefighter in the fire department of Montgomery Township, Pennsylvania. And he's married with 2 daughters and fluent in the German language. So with that, Bernie, I'll turn it over to you. Maybe you can tell us something, a little bit about your food bank, and then get on with the show. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Jean, thank you so much. And thanks to Natalie and all of you for joining us this morning. It's an absolute pleasure and delight to be with you today to talk about something that you probably already know a lot about. And this is, as I said in the introduction on the website, not the usual type of ethics presentation that we see from time to time in our continuing legal education seminars. Today's going to be something a little bit different. And I'm hoping that at the end of the day today, it'll cause you to think, maybe share the presentation with your colleagues and friends, because there's something I think indelibly evident here. We're all in this profession together of legal, as attorneys, as arbitrators, as mediators, but our legal profession is really something that is a noble cause. That's why we got into it in the first place, to help other people. But so many times we see that some of our colleagues maybe take somewhat undue advantage of that. Maybe we try to cut a little corner here, do something a little bit different here. Maybe it'll give us some more money if we do this on that side, but it may not necessarily be the ethical or the right thing to do. So we'll take a look at some of those things today. Manna on Main Street, as Jean mentioned, is our local food bank here in a suburb of Philadelphia, where I live. It's right down the street from our firehouse. It serves over 2,000 people a week in terms of what it does. There is a lot of food insecurity, as you know, around the world, which is why I was so delighted to have the opportunity to work with Jean and Natalie and Sarah here to present you with a little bit of something to give you something to think about. So with that, let me share my screen with you all. And Jean, you'll let me know if that is coming through.
It is. I can see it. Thank you.
It is wonderful. And I'm trusting that you are all seeing the spinning aspect of the animation of the PowerPoint. I can't tell you how long it took me to figure that out, but there it is. So the bottom line of our theme today is thinking about how to be ethical and doing the right thing even when no one else is looking. So what we're going to talk about today are a number of different objectives. We're going to take a look a little bit at some of the foundations of ethical behavior to understand the differences between what is moral and what is ethical, because there is a difference. But interestingly enough, I think you'll see at the end of the session here today that a lot of what we see with moral and ethical behavior is that they merge together. There's actually a synchronicity of those two things. We'll become a little bit familiar, and I'll throw some ideas at you for your consideration on how to resolve some inherent conflicts of how you can resolve those ethical dilemmas when they come about. Because sometimes it appears that there is no right answer, or somebody's going to get hurt no matter what happens. We'll understand the value of maybe doing a personal code of ethics. If you've not done that already, I'd encourage you to think about doing that at the end of today's session. There's some things that we can take from our upbringings and the way we've been taught, and things that we can put down on a piece of paper that will be our own personal code of ethics, or those for our firms or companies if you choose to do that as well. So let's dive into this a little bit and talk about whether it is still even important to talk about ethics in today's society? I would venture to say it is. It is very important that we talk about ethics all the time because it's something that really underscores the things that we do every day. It's part of the function, the framework, the foundation, the actual linchpin or cornerstone of everything that we do from the time we wake up in the morning until the time we turn off the light at the end of the evening. And so there are some simple truths that I have found when I was doing some research into how to be ethical in the world today and to give you some ideas. And you probably all heard about that book, Everything I've Learned, I Learned in Kindergarten, right? And some of those simple truths have an ethical component to them as well. Sharing is caring, right? We all know that. You need to play fair no matter what you do and who you are there with. Don't hit people. That's a good thing not to do. Say you're sorry if you've done something wrong. Wash your hands, particularly important in this COVID time in which we continue to live. Look both ways before crossing traffic. Take a nap whenever the opportunity presents itself. Always good to be revitalized. Clean your room. That's always a good thing to do, especially when Santa is coming. Always put things back where you found them. And my favorite one of all, if it's yellow, let it mellow. If it's brown, flush it down. It's just one of those things, a simple truths that we've all learned that are all part of our upbringing. The aspect of ethics and morality, folks, really has an interesting component. No matter what the basis of your faith or practice or belief is, there is somewhat of a different type of calling. We all answer to a little bit of a higher calling, right? Whether it's a religious calling or a belief that there is some power that is greater than us, there is something that we all aspire to be that higher calling, especially in the legal profession. People are looking at us not just to be an example, but to be exemplary in what it is that we do. So there's sometimes that we think about these things that we say to ourselves, well, maybe if I do this, it's going to be okay because everybody does it, right? What's good for the goose is good for the gander. If I don't do it, somebody else will. We've always seen that, right? If I don't take this case, somebody else is going to take it and they'll be able to make the money on it. They'll resolve the ethical persuasion in some other way that they feel comfortable in doing that when I cannot do so. Eat what you kill is always something that comes up from time to time. Tit for tat is another excuse. If it's not illegal, it's ethical. If I'm not going to get arrested for it, it should be okay to do that. The end always justifies the means, and we've always done it that way. How many times have we heard that excuse? And then my favorite one was always, don't worry, the auditor is my nephew. So we always oftentimes take advantage of that as well. I put this slide in because it's one of my favorite things when talking about ethics. Do you all remember the show that was on television years ago called Cheers? You had Cliff Clavin, the mailman, on the left-hand side of your screen, and Norm on the right-hand side of the screen. Whenever Norm walked into Cheers, everybody always screamed, "Norm!" And they would tell everybody, and he'd saunter over and sit his place down at his favorite place there at the bar, and the beer would be put down in front of him. And Sam, who was the bartender, would always say to him, "How you doing today, Norm?" And my favorite line from one of those shows was always, "Sammy, it's a dog-eat-dog world out there, and I'm wearing milk-bone underwear." It's always something, right? If we don't do something, that somebody else is going to do it. Somebody else is always after us to get at what we have, what we feel that we own. Someone's always trying to get at us. So there are always temptations to do something in a way that might not necessarily be ethical or moral. So like the speed limit. How many times have we obeyed the speed limit? I will tell you, first off, true confession, if I see this sign, I'm probably going to be doing 75 or 80. It's illegal, and I know that if I get stopped by the police, I'll get a ticket. So that's one of those questions about, everybody does it. So let's take a look at what we have as duties, not just as lawyers or legal professionals, insurance professionals, but as basic human beings. There's that duty of honesty, the duty of having competence, diligence, loyalty, to maintain independent judgment, to have that duty of candor and communication, and the duty of confidentiality when a client or someone entrusts us with information that they'd like to keep private. To that extent, when we dive into this a little bit deeper, the whole things of what we do day to day really have their essential purposes in principles and values. So what people see us doing every day on the telephone, on Zoom meetings, in courtrooms, as arbitrators or mediators, what underlies what we do as practices really has its genesis in the values and principles that we've learned through the years, what we've been taught by our parents, our grandparents, clergy, whoever it might be, and particularly by others that we see. I like what Natalie does. I didn't necessarily like what Jim did, but I love what Natalie does. So I'm going to adopt that practice and view that as one of my own and bring that in my own ethical cultures. So what it really boils down to is that constant interplay between what is good and evil. Ethics are the rules that we are provided with in the social system that we live in, and the morals that we adopt are our own principles, going back to this principles, values, and practices slide. And then the basic core values that underlies all this, folks, is the respect, the trust, and responsibility that everyone that interplays with us, interacts with us, even our friends and family, look to us to make sure that they can count on us to do these three things. So what does that really boil down to? Well, in my view, it boils down to these basic core values. It's ways in which to make sure that when someone looks at you, what's the first word that comes to their mind? Can I trust that person? Are they a leader? Will they be fair? Do they have integrity? Do they offer concern for others? Are they honest? Do they have respect? Are they loyal? And is there accountability? Is there a way in which I can make sure that if Bernie says he'll do something, that I can count on him to do that to the end of the day and that thing will get done? It's all a matter of figuring out how we find our true north. There are a number of ways, and you've all heard it, take the high road, right? Find your true north. There's always ways to look at things to make sure that we're doing the right thing, even though nobody else is looking. So let's look at some definitions that underlie the aspect of all this. There's integrity, which is choosing your own thoughts and actions based upon values versus personal gain. And I would offer to you that personal gain is not necessarily always bad, but if personal gain is a little bit higher on the scale than what the values are that you represent and what people believe you to be, then that's maybe something that we ought to take a look at and maybe press down on that value scale a little bit more and make sure we're doing the right thing. The morality aspect of things is really looking at right and wrong decisions. There are things that come from the heart and the brain. It's your conscience. It's that inner voice that you hear all the time of, well, I don't think you may be able to do that. You may not want to necessarily do that particular thing or take that particular action. It's sort of like a stop sign that comes up immediately, or that little devil that sits on your shoulder that says, let's just take a break here and think about whether that's really the right thing to do. So when we're dealing with individuals, we're hoping that we can deal with folks that can distinguish between what's right and wrong. And those principles or values that are based upon what society and we as a collective group of legal and insurance professionals believe what is right, proper, or acceptable ways of behaving. And then the integrity is choosing our thoughts and actions and how we want to be viewed, how we want to be looked at. And I'll get into that in a little bit of time. The morality, distinguishing between right and wrong, honesty, always being truthful to others as well as to yourself, because that's that accountability aspect that we're always talking about. The respect, to treat others the way you want to be treated. We always heard about the golden rule and reciprocity, right? But I would offer to you that there's something even better than the golden rule, and I call it the platinum rule, to treat others the way they would want to be treated. That's a little bit something different than the way we would want to be treated in treating others. Maybe we ought to take a step back and think about how the person we're interacting with would like to be treated and change our behaviors, change our decisions to maybe hope that we can elevate them or do something better for them. So when we talk about putting these core values together and coming up with a code of ethics, it really comes down to the four aspects of having a mission statement, a vision statement, understanding our why, not what we are or how we do things, or who we are, but why we do the things what we do. As you probably have all seen that Simon Sinek video about your why, he always says people don't buy what you do or how you do it. They buy or interact with you or hire you because of why you do the things that you do. And then that all translates into our value proposition and becomes our code of ethics. So why should we have them? There are a number of reasons. It will help us to define on a piece of paper that we can always refer to. And sometimes you'll go into offices, you'll see the code of ethics hanging up on the wall in a nice frame. That's always nice to see. But it reminds us from time to time who we are and why we're doing the things that we do, to promote those very high standards of practice, to have that benchmark for self-evaluation, to look back at the end of the year, maybe every week or every month. What did I do this month, this week that was good? What would I do differently had I had the opportunity of doing that again? To establish maybe a framework for professional behaviors and responsibilities, and looking for that occupational identity that we strived to have people respect us for, and have that mark of professional and occupational maturity. But most importantly, I think having a code of ethics for ourselves and our companies really distinguishes ourselves from those who hold the same moral and ethical principles that we hold. And they're all so near and dear. And let me give you some examples from my own personal background and some of the things that I've encountered. Earlier this spring, I went to Home Depot, which is literally about a half a mile from my house. We needed to have mulch. My wife, Martha, and I did have mulch for the garden. And we measured it all out and we figured, okay, there's 50 pounds of mulch in a bag. We need 20 bags of mulch. So I went to Home Depot and you got one of these long carts. You push it through to the mulch aisle and you start piling the mulch on there. You're counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You get interrupted with something. You go to the cashier and they say, well, rather than taking the little gun and doing each little barcode, how many bags do you have, sir? I have 20 bags of mulch. Well, I got home and guess what? I had 21. Each bag of mulch cost probably $4.89. What did I do? I went back to Home Depot because I did not feel, even though Home Depot will make more money than probably, with all due respect, all of us on the Zoom call today combined in a single day. But at the same point, that's not the point. The point is, can I look myself in that mirror tomorrow morning when I'm shaving and saying, I did the right thing? Or knowing that I didn't steal, well, maybe I did, it was unwittingly, certainly, and no one would ever miss it. But I felt a personal obligation in the way I handle myself and what I believe is moral and ethical to go back and go to the cashier and say, hey, I was here a little while ago, bought 20 bags of mulch, got home, found it was 21. Here's another $4.89. He looked at me like I had two heads. Like no one's ever done that before, but at least it made me feel good and feel better. There's also the case that I refer to as the case of the Master Sergeant Underwriter. I was giving a similar presentation, much like this one, to a group of insurance executives. And I asked, does anyone have any ethical examples or things they're going through right now that you think is maybe an ethical dilemma that you would like to share? And maybe if you haven't decided what to do, maybe we could talk about it. Well, this one gentleman raised his hand and he was a master sergeant in the Army, in the National Guard. And he says, well, I have one. I was in the National Guard and was stationed in Iraq and Afghanistan. Came back and I was at a fort here in California, and they offered me off-base housing. I was living on base at the time with my wife and daughter, and I had so much stuff, I needed to borrow one of the vehicles within the fleet here to take my stuff from the Army base to my new apartment. And no one was around. It was a holiday weekend. I said, nobody's going to miss it anyway. So I requisitioned it off myself and signed the commander's name to the requisition form so that he could get through the security gates with the truck to move himself to his new apartment. Now, who among us would have said that was wrong? Who among us wouldn't have said, you know what, you've earned the opportunity to use one of the base's trucks to move yourself from point A to point B, no problem, go ahead and take it. But what do you think happened 2 days later after he returned the truck back after moving himself off base? Knock at the door, military police, Master Sergeant, we have a warrant for your arrest. And they took him in and they prosecuted him for stealing Army property without authority, for putting down the name of his commander, signing his name without permission. That was not right. It was a forgery, right? So he never really thought anything of it, but it was one of those ethical things that was always in the back of mind. And it happened 6 years before the time that we had this meeting. His boss was sitting next to him. And what do you think happened? At that moment in time, his boss took a look at him and said, I'm really sorry, but you're fired, because he had to sign a form with the Department of Insurance in California, verifying that everyone has done things correctly and no one has been arrested. The charges were eventually absolved because he could explain it. And they said, well, look, you've done good things. You served your country. And they gave him a reprimand, but he was arrested. So that unfortunately came to pass. And he has that now on his permanent record. There was another woman in the room who raised her hand, and this is the case of the ex-husband's deposit. And she said, well, I've got something going on right now in my life that I don't know what to do. So we coached her a little bit and said, okay, tell us what happened. Well, she and her husband had gone through a divorce when their daughter was 3 years old. Fast forward now 20 some odd years ahead, the daughter is getting married, and she wants her father, who's never paid alimony, never paid child support, and left his ex-wife and daughter to fend for themselves all on their own. But she wants to have her father walk her down the aisle in the traditional way that ladies and young ladies get married. So the ex-husband and ex-wife have a conversation. He said, look, this is happening. I would like to split the deposit for the hall where the reception is going to be. Not a problem. Terrific. It was $2,500 for the two of them, total of $5,000 as a deposit to rent the hall where the reception would take place after the wedding. What do you think happens? The wedding gets called off. The fiancés have an argument. They break off the marriage. Everybody's fine. But now our friend, the ex-wife, is holding $2,500 of her ex-husband's money and says to herself, you know what? I can justify this. I can legitimate this because for 20 years, that you know what did not pay any alimony or child support to my daughter or me. So this is payback time. So why did she even bring it up? You know why? Because it was that little voice inside her head saying, I don't know, is that really the right thing to do? So we talked a little bit about the right and wrong things and being ethical and being moral. And she said, I'll be right back. We took a break. We saw her. She went out, called up her little cell phone, dialed her husband, says, I got to give you back your deposit. I'll be sending that to you in the mail. Doing the right thing, even though he probably had forgotten about it, but it was one of those things that she did not feel she could live with herself, or that even just wasn't the right thing to do. Let me tell you about the case of Stephanie Hollis. Jean mentioned to you at the beginning of the hour that I was the Chief National Litigation Counsel at a domestic property and casualty insurance company. As part of that, I was also, one of my responsibilities was to be responsible for the environmental claims unit. And we had a tremendous home office examiner named Stephanie Hollis. And Stephanie was terrific. She was everybody's go-to person. If there was not a term or condition or definition or exclusion or endorsement of an insurance policy that could not be understood, you called Stephanie and said, could you explain this to me? And she was just everyone's go-to person. She was such a go-to person that the insurance company actually put her on the cover of the annual report in 1998, along with a number of other people who had achieved distinction within the organization. Everything was going great. I had a rule that all of my direct reports on a Friday night would always come into my office to say goodbye. I could wish them a good weekend and thank them for the good work they did that week. Stephanie walks in. Okay, Bernie, I'll see you. Have a good weekend. Okay, Steph, we'll see you on Monday. Well, Monday comes, no Stephanie. It's 9:30. We call her cell phone, no answer. We call her house, no answer. 10 o'clock, same thing, 10:30, 11, noon. We finally get a phone call from her boyfriend. Her boyfriend says, I've got some bad news. Stephanie had a headache on Friday night. We took her to the hospital very early Saturday morning. And it turns out she has a brain aneurysm. Oh my gosh. What are we going to do? So we all got together that night before surgery on Tuesday morning. We all sat in Stephanie's room. We sat around her bed. We held hands. We prayed. We sang songs for her. We made her laugh. We told jokes. She was in a really good mood. And then the next day she had her brain surgery. Telephone call from her boyfriend the next day on Tuesday after the surgery. Great news. Stephanie made it through surgery. She's going to be fine. She's in a medically induced coma, but she's going to be okay. And we're all saying, thank goodness, thank goodness. We always admired Steph. She always had the best clothes, the nicest shoes. And for the ladies in the group, she always had the nicest handbags. So we never married, never children, but we always admired that about Stephanie. We knew that she always went to the casinos, sometimes on the weekends in Atlantic City, to get some extra walking around money, as we used to call it. Wednesday comes, the boyfriend calls and said, bad news. Stephanie's never woken up from her coma. She's brain dead. Oh my gosh. So we all went back to the hospital. We all stood around her, said our goodbyes to her. And her boyfriend tapped me on the shoulder and said, can I see you for a second? So we walked down the hall, and in a private moment, he says, I don't know what to do. The doctors are telling me there's no hope. I don't know whether to turn the switches off or leave them on. What do you think I should do? I said, that is a personal decision that only you can make. No one else can make that decision for you. But looking at it, looking at the facts, and we nailed it down. We sort of looked at the drivers and what the various factors are, much like we all do when we're presented with various cases that come before us. We took and said, all right, what would be the right thing to do? What would Stephanie want us to do? Would she want us to wait and hope that she might awaken and live life, perhaps not with the same type of quality life that she enjoyed beforehand? Well, as it turns out, he made the decision to flick the switch, and Stephanie passed away peacefully. The insurance company, now imagine this is one of the top 50 insurance companies in the United States, closed its home office in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania that day, so that everyone could go to the funeral. The owners of the company helicoptered in from New York City so they could be part of it. There were so many people at the funeral that they had to simulcast it to the school across the street. It was tremendous. It was a beautiful service, and everyone told wonderful stories about Stephanie during the eulogy. I'd like you to fast forward now with me 2 weeks. My oldest daughter, Kelsey, I have two daughters, Kelsey and Sarah. Kelsey's 36, Sarah's 34. They're both married now, but I think still somewhat on the company payroll. And I get a phone call. We're getting ready to do Kelsey's graduation from school from one of my colleagues at the company, and says, do you got a minute? I've got a problem. Here, she had gone into Stephanie's office. And have you ever seen those blotter pads that are calendars that people keep on their desks? That's what Stephanie had on hers. And she bent down to pick up a file that Stephanie was working on. And as she did it, her hip sort of hit the blotter. And the blotter moves several inches away. And underneath the blotter, there's an envelope. So she said, I wonder what this is. She takes the envelope, and here's an envelope addressed to Denise Carter, a woman that we had met, one of Stephanie's friends that we had met in the hospital, one of her best friends. And I said, why is there an envelope? And it was a check. You could see, those envelopes that have the checks inside. Why would we be sending an insurance company check to Denise Carter? So she says, I don't know what to do. I said, open the envelope. She said, it's not addressed to us. I said, it doesn't matter. It hasn't been mailed yet. It's still on company property. There's no postage on it. Open it up. So she did. And here was a check for $7,250. And it stayed on there for expert services as the code, the billing code. So I said, wait a minute, this person was an accounting person at a local company not too far away from the offices. She wasn't providing any services on that case. I'll be right in. So I got in my car, drove in. We went to our senior vice president of claims. We called in the SIU unit and did some investigation. Come to find out that it was a scam. Stephanie had $2 million of signing authority. And every so often, she would send a check for indiscriminate various amounts to Denise Carter. And we knew that because our SIU friend pulled up all the payables and found all these checks. And what they would do is they would split the money 50-50. During the time in which she worked at the company, she had embezzled over $2 million from the company in small checks that were sent to her colleague. The moral of the story was, how is Stephanie now going to be remembered? We all eulogized her. She was the greatest thing since sliced bread. People, I even called the CPCU Society because she had not finished all 10 segments of the CPCU designation to see if they would honor her with that designation posthumously. They rightly said they couldn't, but they would put in their books that she had completed 8 out of the 10 exams. We really were shocked, absolutely astounded. But the moral of the story is, how was she viewed then and how is she viewed today? The last example is the case of Student Recognition Sunday. One of my very good friends is a member of an African-American church here in Philadelphia, and he goes every Sunday. And the preacher every year has what's called Student Recognition Sunday, where all the children from the congregation, all dressed in their finest, are brought up to the front of the altar, standing in front of the church and everybody in the church to be admired and recognized for what they've done. Let's call up little Jimmy. He placed first in the track meet. Let's call up Adrian. She placed second in Miss Jameson's dance recital. Let's call all the science fair, getting straight A's, getting a good report, doing your chores. All these kids were being brought up, and one by one, their families were able to tell the pastor something that they did that they should be recognized for. What did the pastor do? You can imagine this, and I'm gonna scream here for a minute, so watch your ears. The pastor stood in the pulpit as all these children are standing in front of the entire congregation and said, "Children, you're all gonna die," in his very evangelical way, saying, one day you're all going to die. They're going to take you and bury you in the dirt 6 feet below ground. They're going to cover your face up with dirt, go back into the church basement, eat potato salad. They're going to talk about you. What are they going to say about you when they do? There's 2 things the pastor said that you get in life: titles and testimonies. Testimonies being the testimony of people. They're going to talk about us after we're gone, even while we're still here. That's what our reputations are based on. That's what Stephanie's reputation was based on. Can you imagine working for 46 years and now having that reputation? So what it all comes down to is, how do we want to be remembered? What will they write on our last marker, right, about us under our names? And for me, I think one of the things that I take from our session today is you all want to be trusted. We want to say that Mark Harwell was trusted, Jean Lawler was trusted, Natalie was trusted. I could trust those people with my life. I could trust them with my secrets. I could trust them with the advice that I would want them to give me guidance on. So that's really what it all boils down to. So in these ethical dilemmas, there's a choice that must be made between 2 courses of action. There are significant consequences with taking one or the other. Either one can be supported by ethical principles. We can justify sometimes both ways of doing things, much like our friend who was working at the insurance agency who said that she may be able to justify keeping her ex-husband's deposit money for all those years that he did not pay her alimony or child support. So it really comes down to how we might be compromised if we take one direction or the other. So how do we go about making that right decision when we're confronted with that ethical dilemma? I think a way of doing it, and these are just some thoughts for you to consider. If we review the facts, the drivers and circumstances of those two actions, those two courses of action of which we have to choose, it'll help us to develop our thought process of making the right decision. If we list those factual reasons for supporting the courses of actions, realizing that there will be consequences no matter what we decide upon, right? There will be identical ethical principles that support each action and the reasons for that particular support. They may be ethically based on the one side by looking at the scales of putting the facts and consequences on one side and the other, doing a good and bad analysis, a pro and con analysis. And then there'll also be the motivation of earning a living, of making money, and what it is that we might want to do. I'll give an example. I had a situation come up the other day where I was asked to be an expert witness for an insurance company, but I had given testimony against a subsidiary of that insurance company before the insurance company owned it. So what do you do in that situation? I'd made the decision that even the appearance of a conflict of interest was enough for me to say thank you very much and to turn down that retention, because I did not want my counsel now to be confronted with cross-examination if they found out on the other side, well, Mr. Heinze, didn't you testify against this company before when it did not owe the affiliate, but now it does? I just didn't want it was just too messy of a situation. So what do we do if both decisions are what we would refer to as okay, right? We all go back to the fact that actions have consequences. What will happen if this happens? What happens if it doesn't happen? What won't happen if it doesn't happen? And what won't happen if it does? If we put all of those things down on a piece of paper and analyze what the consequences of that ethical dilemma are, I think it may help us sometimes to make that right decision. Because as I said, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And we have to make sure that we're happy to live with the action of that ball on the right-hand side going exactly the same direction as the ball on the left does, to make sure that we're happy with that. So what if both actions are okay? These decisions are the hardest to make, especially when it's a choice between what you want and what is right. So here are some 12 questions that we can ask ourselves toward making ethical decisions. And I know that this PowerPoint presentation will be in the recording. If you'd like to have a separate copy of it, my email will be at the end. Please feel free to drop me an email today or whenever it's convenient. I'd be happy to email it out to you. So here are some questions that I have found help me in answering ethical-based dilemmas. Have I defined the problem accurately, and am I unbiased in making the decisions and putting in the facts that I want to make sure that I consider fairly and equitably? How would I define the problem if I were standing on the other side of the fence, if I were looking at it from the person who might be influenced by the action that I'm taking? How did this happen in the first place? Did I do something wrong to cause this ethical dilemma? What are the drivers of what happened? And does loyalty factor in? What does the intention compare to the probable result? How does the intention compare with the probable result? Are the intentions properly motivated? Who could the decision hurt? Could I discuss the problem with an affected party on the other side to achieve an amicable resolution? We do that all the time as arbitrators and mediators, right? We always discuss the problems with the other side. We go into the other room and say, I really think you should think about this. And then we go into the other room and say, we really think you should think about that. And we try to bring people together to achieve that aspect of commonality and common respect. Are we confident that our position will be valid over the long period? If we look 5 years from back, saying, gosh, I wonder if I made that right call. Did I make that right decision? So will our decision stand the test of time? And then the last ones, could we disclose without reservation to our boss, our client, the head of our organization, a colleague, a family member, a mentor, or society as a whole, what we did without reservation? Could we do that? Or if not, perhaps that's not the right direction to go. What's the symbolic potential of our decision if it's understood or misunderstood? There are aspects of optics and clarity that enter into the discussion. And are there any circumstances where we might allow exceptions to our positions? And what exactly are they? So ethical decisions, when we're confronted with them, we need to clarify them, evaluate them, make our decision, implement our decision, and then monitor and modify to make sure that we did the right thing. There's always a chance to, make a little tweak here or there if it has to be done, but we'll find out what that is probably sooner rather than later. The bottom line, much like the doctors say, is first do no harm, right? If we adopt that as our go-to philosophy, we'll be absolutely fine. And if you're still not sure what to do, here's some things to think about. What would your grandmother do? Right? What would our grandmother or grandfather say? What would they do given their ethics? Because you know what I found? In this fast-paced world in which we live, folks, there's still some things that we can take from what our patriarchs and matriarchs have taught us and looking back at how they lived their lives of what it is that they would do. What would we say if a family member, our son or daughter, came to us and said, "Hey, Dad, did you really do that?" If they heard about it from someone else? How would we respond to that? And would we feel okay in justifying it to our children or a family member? What would we do if we knew our decision would be on the front page of tomorrow morning's newspaper? If the front headline said, Bernie Heinze just did X, would we be okay with that, with the rest of the world seeing that? And then lastly, do you shave, put on makeup, brush your teeth, comb your hair? I do. I look in the mirror every day. And folks, it may sound somewhat corny, but it's true. If you can look yourself in the mirror every morning and are happy with yourselves and the decision that you made the prior day or earlier during that day or in the evening, you're going to be absolutely fine, because deep inside is where the decisions and the decision-making power will come from. Ethical behavior really helps us to maintain that moral course when times are turbulent. The lighthouse standing up against this tremendous, powerful wave and tsunamis. And once this decision is made, don't look back. You've made your decision, move forward. I put this graphic in as an example. As Gene mentioned at the beginning, I started the volunteer fire company here in Montgomery Township, Pennsylvania, at Station 18. And I've been a volunteer firefighter now for over 30 years. And I don't do it as much anymore. I leave that to some of the younger folks, but early on in my career, when I became a battalion chief of the fire department and as well as president, one of our chief engineers came to us. His name is John Mogensen, and he said to me, "Hey, Bern, we need some extra drivers to drive at night. Would you be willing to maybe take a class and learn how to drive?" I really didn't have any desire to do that, but okay, if it's something that'll help out the department, the community, absolutely, I'm happy to learn. I learned about friction loss, about how to lay the hose, how to turn everything on, all the buttons, what the right buttons to flick and switch on and off and so forth, and how to make sure that my team is safe. This is a picture of me on my first training day that John took from behind. And the first thing that I said to John was, and I got into the cab of the fire truck, "Hey, John, where's the rear view mirror?" Interesting fun fact, fire trucks don't have rear view mirrors. You can't see behind you because the water and the back of the truck is behind you. So there's nothing to see. You can see out the sides, but you can't see to the back. And that gave me an interesting component, because John said to me when I asked him, "Where's the rear view mirror?" His words to me was, "We don't have them in the fire trucks. And don't worry about it. We're not going that way." Interesting concept, right? We're always going forward, and that's what we have to continue to do. We have to move forward. Once we make our decision, let's move forward and do it. And by the way, fun fact, I will tell you, there is a certain adrenaline rush when you're driving at 55 miles per hour in the oncoming lane of traffic with sirens blaring and red lights flashing that really gets my blood pumping. I'm just saying. So we'll always remember, we want to move forward, make our decision, and don't look back behind. And also remember, folks, only dead fish swim with the current. If somebody says that's the way we've always done it, everybody does it that way, everybody's going with the current. Really examine whether you want to be with the current or whether you want to be an outlier, an outstanding, an exemplary person and head upstream like no one else but you can do. You really have to know yourself. And that really is the bottom line of all of this. Knowing what we want to do, knowing who we are as people, how we want to be viewed, and how we want to be remembered. So the bottom line, if you want to call it Heinze on ethics, as we say, as our title is, ethics is doing the right thing, even when nobody else is looking. And that is a little bit of my presentation for you today. But I don't want to end without sharing with you the terrible consequences. And I know that you're familiar with this because you've all been part of these presentations before. There's a tremendous problem in our world here in the United States, particularly. And I know we have colleagues from South Africa joining us today as well, where there's food insecurity. 1 in 4 children in the United States is a victim of food insecurity. No one can thrive on an empty stomach. There's 42 million Americans who face hunger every day. 13 million of them are children. Hunger really doesn't know any boundaries. And as it says on the Will Work for Food website, we can't help everybody, but all of us can help somebody. So I hope that if you enjoyed today's presentation, you will take an opportunity of jotting down this website or sending a small contribution, whatever you feel is within your heart, to the Manna on Main Street folks. This is a picture I took of the shelves inside a week or so ago when we took some donations down. They're really looking to end hunger, build community, and transform lives for people that rely on us for help in which to do so. So that's my story. I hope you enjoyed today's presentation. We have a few minutes for questions and answers. I'm going to stop the screen share here in a moment, but I just wanted to share with you my email address so that if you wanted to jot that down, Bernie@theheinzegroup.com. If you'd like to have a copy of today's PowerPoint deck, I'd love to send it to you. Please feel free to let me know. I'll happy to send it to you. And folks, please feel free, use the slides, put your name on them, and share them with your colleagues, friends, family, whoever you wish. All right. So that's the end of the screen share. That's the end of the presentation. And I would love to have any questions, and we'll take a look at the chat here. And Jean, with that, let me turn it back over to you for a moment.
Okay, thank you. Wow, that was fantastic, Bernie. I think that we'll all be leaving today and carrying this forward in our future and with people we encounter as we go through life. So thank you so very much. I did have a couple of questions, and then maybe Jeff or some of the others would as well. In the chat, there was a question that was that I would make it a little bit bigger. You know, oftentimes as mediators, let's just go into that way because of the confidentiality with mediation. For a mediator, whether you're the lawyer, the counsel for a party, or you're the mediator perhaps, and things are said when you're in the private breakout rooms that, you know, reasons for doing things, and maybe they're kosher, maybe they're not, you know, maybe they kind of go to, could be borderline or whatever. People posture, people say things. Any thoughts on ways to handle some of that if it's things that either you really don't want to be involved in? I mean, I certainly would tell people that, but doing that, or if someone says something that really changes the dynamics or wants you to fake something, you know, with the other side to be able to get a settlement.
That's a very good question, Jean. And I'll tell you what I do when I do arbitrations and mediations. I will ask the other side if they would have any difficulty with me sharing that information. And I will ask them for permission first. I will never violate the code of confidentiality or the credibility that I have with the people that have selected me to be the arbitrator or mediator. I will always ask them for permission to share that. And if they don't give me permission, there may be ways in which I can use some different words without giving away that confidentiality, of making sure the other side knows that these are some movement or some opportunity for momentum to really get the case resolved today, and maybe not necessarily saying the reasons why that was imparted to me. So I will always ask for permission to share the information, or perhaps to make sure that my credibility is maintained with both sides. And I will tell them that so that they feel at the very beginning of the mediation free to share anything they wish with me, but to make sure they also know that I will not share anything they tell me in confidence with the other side. And let me, while I have the mic, Jean, also answer one of the questions that Jorge asked with regard to the Stephanie Hollis case. Yes, her accomplice was prosecuted. And the unfortunate aspect of this was that she was a single mother with an 8-year-old child who did not have any aunts or uncles to go to, and wound up going from foster home to foster home to foster home. It was her first offense, criminal offense. So she did get a reduced sentence, but she did serve 3 years' time before she was released.
Wow. One of these other questions here is, as a mediator, we may hear in caucus that indicate that one party does not declare an income for tax purposes, for example. Is it something that we have an ethical obligation to do anything about if it's not relevant to the dispute?
That's a great question. I don't know that there are any reporting requirements for us as mediators or even as private citizens to call someone in for doing something that may, in our view, be illegal. I think what I would do in that situation, Jean, and interested to hear what your thoughts are, but I think in my situation that came about with me, I would counsel the individual to make sure that they were aware that they do have an obligation to pay those taxes and that there is a reporting obligation there. I can't go to the IRS and say, hey, listen, I was just a mediator in a confidential mediation, and I heard that Bill Smith is not reporting income for tax purposes. I don't think that's my role, and I don't think that's something that I would be required to do. But I would certainly counsel them to make sure that they knew that that was something that I felt they did have an obligation for.
Okay, thank you. There are just so many things that come up everyday life. Does anybody else have any questions? Jeff, are you still here, Jeff? I don't see your.
I see
I'm
Jorge's
right
got
here.
his hand
I'm right
raised.
here, Jean.
Oh, there you are. Okay, you're the
Well,
top right.
this
And
is
Jorge
a
has a question.
very insightful presentation, Bernie. You have such a wonderful way of making these issues clear to everybody. We're just about out of time. I don't know if there are any other questions in the chat, Jean?
Well, Jorge here has a question. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Jorge, just unmute yourself and put your microphone down so we can hear you.
You're still muted.
You're still muted.
Now, can you hear
There
me?
we are. Perfect. And then bring your microphone down, Jorge, to your mouth.
Yeah, Jorge's, you're joining us from Spain, right? It's nice to
Yes,
see you.
I'm in Madrid. Yes, unfortunately, I can't go to the US now because there are COVID-19 travel restrictions. So, yes,
Only
well,
a matter of time, Jorge. Only a matter of time.
I hope so. Well, thank you, Bernie. I was just wondering about two, let's say, features of human beings. One is self-deceivement, and the other is self-justification. Those factors operate in real life. Otherwise, I think that we would not see so many frauds, so many acts of corruption in government and in business. How do you confront that?
You raise a very good question, Jorge, and here's what I would respond to you. Self-justification is probably one of the most difficult things and easiest things for us to do, and most difficult things to try to make sure that we validate. In my view, when we're confronted with an ethical situation, we need to validate that self-justification to make sure it's very easy for us to say, heck, I bought 20 bags of mulch. They're not going to miss the 21st bag. They're not going to miss those $4.89 that I took from Home Depot. That's a self-justification. But we also have to answer that inner voice and see if we can justify it in a moral or higher obligation that we have. As people, unlike attorneys, the folks that live across the street or next door to us, or the folks in the office next door to mine, are not lawyers. I think we as lawyers, as mediators, arbitrators, and insurance professionals have a noble and higher calling. We have to hold ourselves up to a higher standard. And if we do that, if we become examples of good examples, of exemplary examples to the profession and the industry, others will see that hopefully, and they can say, boy, I'd really like to be like her. I'd really like to take and have the mindset that she does to make sure that when something like that happens, that I'm doing the right thing. But self-justification is a very difficult thing to go around. All I can say to you, Jorge, is I hope that in presentations like this, or when we have those kind of conversations with others, that people will realize I don't just need to justify it to myself. I need to justify it to my better self.
And what a fantastic note to end on. Thank you for that question, Jorge. And thank you, Bernie. It's 9 o'clock here in Los Angeles, and it's on the top of the hour, wherever in the world you might be. So thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Same time, same place. Thanks so much. Thank you, Bernie.
Thank you.